What's going on, everybody? This is Kyle Hunter. I'd like to welcome you back to the Diagnosis Success Podcast, where we talk about motivation, inspiration, dedication. And as always, this is high level conversation, and we just really interview I would say, the most dynamic people that we can find in regards to business, entrepreneurship, leadership, and actually people that are just giving back in their own special way. So today we have a really, really great guest who is a phenomenal brother. He goes by the name of Shelton Quiller, and he is the boss, the CEO of Now You See Construction. All right. So, at the end of the day, man, we just want to give a warm welcome. What's going on, Shelton?
Everything's going fantastic, my friend. How about yourself?
Everything's great, man. We blessed and highly
Yeah,
favored, man. So that's
say
awesome.
that.
Yes, 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 man. So, we happy to have you on the podcast today, Shelton. And this podcast focus on just motivational topics, entrepreneurship, ownership, and we're just going to dive into a couple of topics with you right now.
Absolutely.
Now normally what we do is we say, like, a lot of times people don't know where you're going unless they know where you've been. So can you just talk about your upbringing, what that looked like?
Well, originally I'm from South Carolina. I'm actually here now visiting my parents and everything like that. And growing up in the South, man, we don't call anybody to do anything. When the floors need to be redone, my dad's like, all right, we're gonna go out there and fix these floors today. When the bathroom needs to be redone, all right, today we're laying some tile. And it's just, we don't necessarily call a lot of people to do anything. So with that being said, construction ends up being a part of the culture. I mean, everything from as a child, we're building forts, and they just got more and more advanced as time went by. And in that, both of my father has been a mechanic for the past 40 years, but he's a complete DIY guy and what have you. But both of my brothers are also contractors. They both own contracting companies down here, down south. And in those summers and whatnot, that was the first thing that my parents did. They were like, all right, so you're not going to be sitting at home or anything like that. You're going to go, intern with your brothers in a lot of ways. So with that being said, it started off as just sweeping the floors, and which was one of the things that I learned in one of my very first principles that I learned in construction is the number one rule of construction is to always keep your workspace clean, because whenever your client comes in, they want to see your work and not your mess. Whenever any of those kind of principles and stuff like that, came up over the span of me interning and kind of being the extra hand around and stuff like that. I ended up picking up a lot, man. And in that, as we've gone through simple stuff from, just simple bathrooms and whatnot, and we eventually got into, doing ground up builds and trying to, go into commercial spaces and what have you. So that was and in the South, there's a lot of, metal framing and like, the barn style. So I got a chance to see a lot of the different styles of construction, getting into the concrete and what have you. That was that's another part of my upbringing. And so, going from that particular space and now coming up to New York with it, it kind of just took everything to that next level. I interned, or I should say, kind of, was a helping hand in quite a few companies in New York, more smaller contracting companies, but because I needed to kind of understand the culture there, and or I should say here, so to speak, because I'm actually, now living in New York, but there's a different culture in the South in the construction than there is in the North. There's a lot of things you don't necessarily run into down South in regards to, 120, 150-year-old homes and whatnot, unless you get into some of the more like plantation homes and stuff like that, which are all mainly kind of stick builds. But when you get into New York, you've got the brownstones, you've got, a lot of the row houses, and you've got obviously the high rises and what have you. And so, kind of get into those different areas of expertise that I hadn't necessarily been able to be groomed in down south. Kind of make sure that I was underneath people to make sure that I was on point there. Turner Construction, a very, very large construction company, has kind of done quite a bit of my mentoring and stuff like that between the classes and the things that they've offered for subcontractors and what have you. That's helped out tremendously. But other than that, man, it's really been about, never really calling anybody to do anything. You had to figure it out. And eventually what ended up transpiring is that, you start off kind of rough, but then whenever you get into a more professional space, they're like, well, why'd you do it that way? And then you're like, well, that's the way I've always done it. And I had to, kind of relearn some things over time as I got into the more professional spaces and whatnot. But nonetheless, the real working mechanics of it all, I was really groomed in it from birth. So
Mm-hmm.
with that being, and both of my brothers being contractors, like, that's all we really talk about is building. We talk about, what's going on in the last job site. The guys are, it turns into a small community whenever you start to get into the construction realm, because, you got the day laborers, and you got, oh man, this guy is an incredible carpenter. And then I'm like, well, let me just sit underneath him. Let me just sit underneath this tile guy. Let me just sit underneath, this framer. And in that, within 6 months to a year, I mean, you're really moving and grooving. You're understanding, jack legs and king legs and framing, or you're understanding how to bevel your tile to make sure, things meet like just perfectly. But, overall, I think that the biggest training I had wasn't necessarily in the construction realm, but more in the business realm. My dad said to me whenever I first got started in construction, he said, if you want to separate yourself from all other construction companies, the biggest thing that you could possibly do is always answer the phone. When you do things right, you answer the phone. When you do things wrong, you answer the phone. And in that, people will respect because you answer the phone, because contractors just have such a bad reputation of not getting back to people, not answering the phones,
Taking
all that
people's
kind of
money.
stuff. Say that. Say that, and that's a really big deal. And then, in due time, what really ended up transpiring is, especially with that whole taking of people's money thing, you have a situation where it's like, okay, how do I separate myself even from now that I answer the phone all the time? How am I going to separate myself to the next level? Well, you can't just go out and be somebody's handyman. You got to get licensed. You got to get insured. You got to get workers' compensation insurance. You got to get disability insurance. And as those pieces of the pie continue to grow, what ends up transpiring is you have a situation where people will call you for larger and larger jobs, the more things that you're covered for. And one of the things that I like the most about, no longer being in that handyman space or anything like that, and getting into like real construction, is that as I purchase insurance and everything like that, it's good for me, of course. But the greatest part is that I can offer all these benefits to my customer, because the greatest part of insurance is that it covers everything that I touch from head to toe. So as I go out and, even as I've done work for you and whatnot, if anything would have gone wrong, there's an insurance policy for that. If anything would have, gone awry, or any type of inspection or anything of that sort of nature, I'm licensed for that. So having all those things in order makes your client truly feel at ease. So, in any business that you're working in, it just makes the most sense, if you really want to take it to the next level, to make sure that you dotted every I and crossed every T. It's not just about how beautifully you laid the tile. At the end of the day, that's great. But then, do you have your contracting in order? Do you have, making sure that you paid up all of the permits and all of those different types of things? Because those are the things that truly separate you from everybody else. So,
I'll tell you one thing, man. That's a lot of gems, brother. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? It's a lot of gems, man. And it's true, though. It's true. It's like,
yeah,
when you're in business, when you're an entrepreneur, that's what distinguishes you from your competitors. So it's how you deliver. So my business, acumen has to be very high. I have to be able to have great customer service. Like you said, pick up the phone, even if it's an interim response, even if it's not something you can get to them right away, say, hey, I just want to let you know we got your message. We're going to get back to you in a timely manner, and to exceed expectations too.
Oh, dude, that's so good. And I like the fact that you said exceed expectations, because and there's something that you and I got a chance to talk about
Yeah.
previously, in
Mhm.
regards to, I had a Jewish attorney who taught me that you always under promise and over deliver.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
and it's not even necessarily about misleading your client. It's really about, giving yourself the breathing room just in case anything happens. But then on that same level, if you know your job and you know it well, you give yourself that breathing room. Like, you'll say to a client, okay, they're like, hey, I'd like for you to come in and do my bathroom. And for an absolute fact, based on the guys that you have and based on the skill level, you could really be able to knock this out in 5 business days. You tell them 2 weeks. You tell them 2 weeks, because then what happens is that, let's say that, one of your guys calls out for a day, or you have a situation where, you didn't realize that there was something else that you had to take care of, like maybe there was some rot behind, one of the walls because they were leaking, or any of that sort of type of thing. But what ends up happens is that when you tell somebody 10 days and you're done in 7, then at that point you look like a rock star. And I think
Mhm.
that the perception that we have to make sure that we pass on to our clients, because there's nothing worse than saying, oh yeah, I'll have it done in 5 days, and then it's 10 days, and then you're like, their client's looking at you like, come on, like what's wrong with you? And it
Yeah.
was all based on how you set the rules. And
Hmm.
so had you just given yourself that extra time, had you given yourself that extra breathing room, you would have been on target, even with all of the stuff that happens awry in construction, just as a general, in general. But if you give yourself that extra breathing room, you give yourself that extra leeway, you give yourself that extra time, then at that point you really don't have to work as hard either. That's a huge piece. I mean, and for anybody that's getting a chance to watch this, no matter what industry you're in, um, just because you have your own business, just because you have that first client, or that 100th client, or whatever the case may be, doesn't necessarily mean you want to work harder. You kind of want to work smarter. You know what I mean? So if you know that there's no telling if another client's going to call and say, hey, by the way, can you do a rush order for me? Well, if you're already rushing to get done with that client, then there's no way you can be able to fulfill that rush order for somebody else. No way. So
Very true.
you give yourself the breathing room and that wiggle room to make it so that especially in an environment where it's like, you know, the truck's late to be able to deliver the materials, and they're saying, oh, I forgot to tell you that I need this half-inch coupling and all sort of kind of stuff, and you're running back and forth, and it's just so many different moving parts in this whole logistics piece. It just makes sense to be able to make sure that you give yourself that time and that space to be great. That's
Hmm.
really the part of it. Is that like as when let's say this is a situation where you're again, let's say doing a bathroom or whatever the case may be, and you're laying tile, and then it's at the end of the day, and you told the client that it was going to be done tomorrow, and you're looking at that tile and you're like, if I had an extra time, I probably would pull that thing out. Give yourself the time to be great.
Definitely. Definitely. I agree with that 110%. It's like you got to be great because that's what distinguishes your brand and your company from all your competitors. So, like you said, exceeding those expectations and making sure that it's the highest level. And that speaks volume, man. That speaks volume. That's really dope, man. I wanted to ask you another question because a lot of times people talk about their wins, but they never talk about the losses. And on this show, that's what we like to highlight sometimes, just to show people, what I mean, that sometimes you
Yeah.
take a loss to get a win. So can you talk about some of those challenges that you had as like a business owner and some of those difficulties and how you was able to actually navigate that?
Yeah, so I've got some scars, man. When I first started my company in 2019, my first job was probably one of the larger jobs that I've ever even had as an individual with my company. So we actually had a client that wanted us to redo their entire house, like one of our very first clients, right? So,
Hmm.
and in that, of course, I've redone whole houses or whatever the case may be before, but not necessarily in New York, because I own, 8 pieces of real estate down here in South Carolina and stuff like that. So, it's we redo houses all the time. They're much smaller, but when we start talking about 3,000 square foot Tudor style home in Cambria Heights, it's like, all right, so this is a lofty one, and not to mention it was an insurance job, and so with that being said, I mean we're talking about $250,000 renovation, and
Hmm.
so in that, trying to trying to have my workforce match to what it was that I wanted to deliver to the client in a timely manner, it was a complete catastrophe. Something now that I've got the right guys in place and stuff like that, where I could have knocked out a complete gut renovation of that house in about 3 months or so. It took me 8 months, and in the 8 months, what I ended up doing is I ended up, and this might sound. Let me rewind a little bit. I am Nayusi Construction, right? Nayusi Construction, Nayusi pretty much in Swahili, and it translates into black. And the reason why I named it Nayusi Construction and not Black Construction is because sometimes I think that there's this stigma to being black owned, and sometimes it doesn't feel like the product is as good enough.
Hmm.
But I also wanted to be able to let people that look like me, that look like you, to that there's a company that they can be able to call on that's going to be quality. And so, with that being said, one of the first things that I did is I'm like, I'm going to be gung ho about this, and I'm going to hire all black people just because they're black. And that was the worst thing I possibly could have ever done. And I ended up hiring the hood. I mean, I really ended up hiring the hood. Like, I thought to myself, okay, well, if I'm a skilled craftsman and I have day laborers around me, then at that point I can pretty much manage them. I can, homegrown them, like really groom them up and stuff like that. And in all honesty, it was a complete catastrophe. It took us 8 months to finish what should have been 3 months. And so the don't get me wrong, the property ended up being pristine because by the end I'd learned my lesson and I got everybody out, and then I brought in guys that knew what they were doing. But I tried to be Captain Save the World. That I got to make sure I employ my neighborhood and all these other types of things, which are great values to have, but you can't just choose based on just superficial factors. And so it's got to be a coupling of the skill with the culture and the mentality of what it's going to take to really make things happen. And so in all transparency, like I said, it was a $250,000 job. And for most people, that would pretty much set you up for the year. I mean, even if you just start talking about the fact that, like, general contractors as a whole probably make between 10 and 20% off each job. That's a $50,000 salary for me. And I was good. I should have been good. Would you believe that by the end of it, I actually was in debt $40,000?
Wow. Now, how did that happen? Was it because the numbers were off? Like, what was going on with that?
I also had to learn in the insurance game that you have to put up the money first, and then after that, they actually recoup you. So in that, between flexing the credit cards and stuff like that to be able to make sure that I just finished, and then on that same level, it got to a point where, because I was constantly late, I tried to throw a lot of kudos on the top to be able to, sweeten the pot for the deal for the client, because I knew that I wasn't making the deadlines. And so in me sweetening the pot, new patio, new garage deck, new all these other types of things. And because I was like, oh yeah, well, I know we didn't make the cutoff, but I just had this idea for the rear patio area. We're gonna do all new pavers in the back and stuff like that. And it's like, do the job that's specified inside of the contract, and then after that, if they need something else, they'll pay you for it. But because I was constantly thinking to myself, oh, because I'm not meeting the specific mark, that at that point I need to be able to sweeten the deal for the client, it ended up putting me in an enormous amount of debt. And so don't get me wrong, in due time, we were able to, kind of claw our way out of that. And the client even kind of felt bad. They were like, are you getting paid for this? I was like, no, but don't worry about it. We're going to make sure everything's beautiful and all this kind of. I turned into a yes man. And it was the worst thing I possibly could have ever done, because I ended up, just kind of digging a hole for myself. Like, literally, I took a shovel and I just dug a hole for myself. And, between, the front, but you had an ugly awning before. Now we're going to build a complete, pergola where it's going to have the style of a Tudor. And it just, I almost made it into my home instead of it being my client's home.
Right.
And that was a big part that I needed to make sure that I separated from, that this is a job and this person is paying me to do something very specific. And whenever I go above and beyond, however great that may be, sometimes I need to sit back and say, okay, this thing I just failed at. Okay, where would you like to go, client, from here? And if they decided to go in a different direction, I probably could have cut my losses. But since I kept on, trying to overcompensate for the fact that there were some places where I was failing at, it made for a situation where I just continued to dig myself in a further and further hole. So that was a major piece. And then one other failure that I'll highlight is there was the hiring of the hood, and then there was also the hiring of friends. That was a major issue, man. Like and don't get me wrong, there are some that have fallen by the wayside, but there's still a few that are there that obviously that have risen to the occasion. But hiring friends, it turns into be something where just because you're at work and you're friends doesn't mean this is the time for us to just chit chat and hang out. Like, and in that, especially, in construction where, you want to have something that kind of motivates the guys and stuff like that. So you got the music playing, and then the next thing you know, it just turns into a hangout. It literally turned into a hangout because I'm hanging out with my friends. and I'm hanging out with guys that, I would invite over to the barbecue, or that know my kids and my kids call them Uncle so and so, or and all that other kind of thing, and it ended up slowing down my productivity. And I'll say this is that as I've transitioned from looking for people that actually have the skill, there are even times whenever, the people that I've hired now that have the skill level that we might not necessarily have the language to be able to communicate like I want to. But in all honesty, a lot of times that's a good thing, because now there's not a lot of this.
Not a lot of
There's a lot of
talk.
this. There's a whole lot of
Exactly.
this. So
Exactly.
it helps out. I mean, as long as you understand the job, you understand what it is that I'm looking for you to do, and my money is good, your work is good. At that point, it ends up being a win-win for everybody. We don't necessarily got to be buddies. That's not what this is about. Of course, you want to create a conducive work environment that makes everybody just enjoy being to work. But not every day is going to be roses and flowers. So it's good to be able to just solely focus on the goal.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. And I just kind of want to piggyback off of what you said, because you made some really dynamic points. One of them where you were talking about, like, because it's a black owned business, that you felt compelled to hire black employees,
Yeah.
and I think we've all been there. Like, even with my company, owning a music licensing company, in the beginning, I went through that as well. But it was different because I learned early on, because I had another company several years ago, and it was like I wanted to put on the whole hood. I put on my peoples, and it was just chaos. It was organized chaos, and it was
Organized chaos. That's
it's like,
good.
what is this? And like you said, when you put on your you put on your friends, it's like there's no structure, right? Like, you lose track of time, you lose track of business, everybody chilling, everybody having a good time. So it just became chaotic. But one thing that you said that I liked is that, when it comes to black business, black ownership, like, we have to be twice as good. That's what people don't realize. It's like, if you're privileged, it's automatically just a given that your product or your service is going to be good. When it
Sure.
comes to black ownership, what I don't like, a lot of times, there's always that proverbial question mark. Is it going to be good? And we
Yep.
experience it when we go to the hood. If you want to go to a soul food spot, you pull up, say, hey, can I have some fish? We ain't got no more fish. You know what I'm saying? Or, oh,
It's
you
a
got
fish
yam?
spot. Why you got no fish?
Yeah, you got. We ain't got no yams. I'm like, well, what you got? Water. It's like, and then we accept it, because it's like, all right, we here, but and you want to support black business, but that's part of what I say is, like, a lot of times we have to rise above that. We have to rise above those stereotypes. We have to rise above the fact that we're that the expectation shouldn't be that just because of our skin color that people got to support us. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Right.
I don't want that. I don't want that crutch. Like, I want you to support because you genuinely feel that the product and the service is actually good.
Absolutely. And if I could piggyback on that, bro, is that like I think that a lot of times it's okay to have, like, I do a lot of reading. There's a book called The Lean Startup. It's okay to be a lean startup. And what I mean by that is that, like, okay, whenever you don't have whatever it is that the client is asking for, that's okay. And it's like, whenever you're transparent with the client in a great customer service way, you end up finding that it's probably closer for you to be able to grab it than you might believe. So I think that whether it means a situation where, like, there was a time whenever I didn't necessarily have heavy machinery to be able to have access to and stuff like that, and I was like, like, oh well, can you do this full demo knockdown or whatever, and then at that point it's like, okay, I don't necessarily have that kind of equipment. They're like, oh, okay, well, do you have somebody that you might recommend? And I'm like, Then what ends up transpiring is, because I was transparent and I was honest and I was doing it in a highly excellent customer service kind of platform. What ended up transpiring is that they ended up planting a seed in me and saying, well, I really like the way that you were so honest about it, and you actually went out and took a look at it. But there's a specific guy that I think you might need to give a call to. And then at that point, I give them a call. I still got the contract, but I subcontracted it out to them. So it's like I ended up making a little bread on the side because I was transparent enough to say that I don't have it. Then even the client put me on, and then at that point, I ended up still making something out of it. It might have not been necessarily what I wanted to, but that honesty is always the best policy. And it's just I mean, and I can't, not just honesty. How you present the honesty is we ain't
Yeah.
got no yams. No, oh, I'm so sorry. The last customer that just walked out, they just killed the yams. They've been so good all day
Uh-huh.
long. But I promise you, if you show up tomorrow, I'm gonna throw a little extra
A little
yam in
extra
there.
for
You
you.
know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like at that point they're like, oh, that's dope. You know what I'm saying? It's a little, give me a little extra mac, and I'm like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
cool. Let me drop a
Yep.
little extra mac in there. And
Yep.
so it's you can't have the attitude. We have to break the stigma. We definitely have to be twice as good. And I think that the other portion of it is that like we have to begin to implant ourselves into spaces that are that we're not necessarily so represented in. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the thought of everybody and their mama being able to cook, which is great. But it's like, okay, so everybody and their mama knows how to cook, but do we have any poultry suppliers? Do we have any pork suppliers? Do we, like, knowing that black people eat the majority of shellfish in this country? Do we have any crab and shrimp providers and the suppliers that are making the logistics happen where we're not necessarily so represented? So it's like a lot of times we mistake, just because we're buying from a black owned retailer, that we're buying black in a lot of ways, and that's not necessarily true, because they get that chicken from the same spot that everybody else is getting it from, and they don't always look like us. So it's
It's
like
true.
we have to begin to control the entire chain,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the things that I eventually want to get into in the construction realm. Is that, like, of course, yeah, I want to be able to build, but then my intention is to go back to school in the fall to become an architect, and then
Wow. That's
I'm
awesome.
growing. Yeah, man, it's absolutely. I want to be able to be a one-stop shop, and then as I'm really getting heavier and heavier into the game, as I'm forming alliances with black-owned electricians and black-owned plumbing companies and whatnot. Like, we've been talking about opening up a plumbing, electrical, and carpentry supply store. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, instead of going to Home Depot, you can get everything you need here. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like each of us being in our own specific areas of expertise that allows us to know exactly what's hot, exactly what everybody wants, exactly what works, and we'll be able to make sure that it's not just something on the shelf. It's like, we use this every single day. We know the hardy backer should not be put inside of X place, or we know the cement board needs to be put right here. Don't use anything other product but this, because and in us being in the industry, and not just people that are brokering deals with a company to put something on a shelf. It allows for us to be able to offer a much better service than a Home Depot or a Lowe's would ever be able to offer. So
Awesome.
that's kind of the niche market there.
Yeah, definitely. It's fine. And you spoke something that was very true. It's true to power. At the end of the day, it's like being mindful of ownership from top to bottom. Like, I remember when Black Lives Matter first hit, and it was such a big thing in the initial stages. And I remember going online, and you could see all these Black Lives Matter t-shirts. But when you did your research about who was selling the t-shirts, you had Asian people selling t-shirts,
Yep.
Caucasians. So it's like you're getting the message across, but as far as the economics behind it, someone else is getting paid. You know what I'm
Doc,
saying?
the
So
economics, the economics, the economics. I mean, you look at the fact that we've gone through civil rights, we've gone through Jim Crow, we've gone through all these other places where we've overcome in a lot of ways, but the economics are just not necessarily showing. So we've got to start building uh, movements that are based on economics, and a lot less about social justice in a lot of
mhm.
ways. And I know that some people are gonna be like, "Oh, boo," but let's really think about this for a second. If we control the economics and the education and the things that are really kind of shaping the way our community moves and functions, then at that point it's like, do we really need the social justice?
Mhm.
Because you know we're going to know for sure that police officers are not going to come into our neighborhood when we've got a lot like the Jewish community has with, like, the Shamrim. They have
Oh yeah.
their own police force, and they,
Yeah.
like, a lot of different things. You can't really go into their neighborhoods and say you're going to do A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z, because they just don't play that.
Mhm.
They have the economics behind them. They got the politics behind them. They got all those different types of things. So we have to begin to build those infrastructures. And in being entrepreneurs, I think that it's obviously important for us to make sure that we hire people that look like us and all that other kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, black ownership doesn't necessarily mean black operated in a lot of
Mm.
ways.
Mm.
So in the black operations, we can no longer separate ourselves between our success in our community. Because
Mm-hmm.
one of the very first things that a lot of us do as soon as we get a little bit of money, we out.
Move out
You
the
know what I
hood.
mean?
You
But
leave.
we
Yeah.
move out the hood, and I get it because I've got small kids. I understand it completely. But I even look at my own parents. As soon as they got some money, they it was out, OWT out, like out, right? So and then in that, like I look back now that my parents are well to do. My dad's been an entrepreneur in the community, and like sponsors all these parade things and stuff like that. And he's walking in the parade and passing out his famous barbecue chicken that he,
Mhm.
all this other kind of stuff. But I wonder what it would look like if we still lived in our old neighborhood and those kids that look just like you and I got an opportunity to have a role model.
Mhm.
What happens when you suck all the role models out of the community? I mean, you kind of have this suction of power, this vacuum.
Mhm.
So we have to make sure that there's nothing wrong with wanting better, but what does it look like whenever we say, okay, instead of us moving out of projects and moving to into the Beverly Hills, what looks like when they say, okay, we're going to buy this building, and no longer are the elevators going to be pissy, and no longer are the buzzer's not going to work, and
Mhm.
we're going to make sure that there's no more graffiti on the outside of the walls and all of that kind of stuff. And then at that point we have a beautiful neighborhood. I mean,
Mhm.
it's no longer the hood, it's a neighborhood. and
Mhm.
and that's really, I think, what our next generation deserve. And I think that that's what we deserve, knowing that we made it, to
Yeah.
be able to put a mark on your community, you
Mm.
know.
Mm. That's powerful. That's powerful, man. And you're right. At the end of the day, I remember talking to a couple of people about this. I had to speak at a conference, and I said, it's two things that I primarily focus on when I talk about just fighting systemic racism and equality, and that's laws and economics. When you have the laws, you know what I'm saying, that leads to change. But on top of that, you got economics, because if you have the finances, you can do a lot more. Like you said,
Yep.
opening up buildings with higher standards. So when you look in our communities, a lot of these projects, a lot of these buildings with pissy elevators, deplorable conditions. That's because the ownership doesn't look like us. They don't care.
They don't
Like,
care.
why would they care? So at the end of the day, it's like we're more cognizant and we think about these things to say, hey, you know what? This is going to be a fair representation of what I want for our people. You know what I'm saying? So,
Absolutely.
I mean, that speaks value.
And we have to take care of each other. Like, I think
Mm,
that's a super important part. I mean, I've gotten a chance to, as I've moving and grooving in New York and whatnot, I've gotten a chance to see quite a few of the neighborhoods, and especially in the construction realm and whatnot, when they want you to come in to do this or to come in to do that.
mhm.
There's always uh, somebody that's kind of like the guardian shepherd over the neighborhood in those spaces. You know what I mean? Whether that means the Asian community or the Jewish community, or just whatever community. Like, it's not necessarily always based on how good you are. It's based on the fact that there's a guardian shepherd that says, okay, Abraham is coming in from so and so, Israel or whatever the case may be, and until he gets on his feet, he's going to live in this particular building in Williamsburg. And in that, it's going to be, he's not going to have to be concerned about a lot of the things that he would if he was doing it all by himself. We
Mhm.
have to begin to lock together and start to say to ourselves, okay, because of the fact that I've gained this level of success, because of the fact that there have been people that have, just like you, Kyle, that have really poured into me. Like, you didn't have to give me the job. You didn't have to say, hey, I want you to do this construction and whatnot. So with that being said, I owe it to you and all the people that look like you to make
Mhm.
sure that as I continue to grow, that as I continue to go up, that I continue to help people grow up. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So that's a really big piece, man. Is that, like, it's a big cycle, and that's what currency really should be. It should be that cycling of the
Mhm.
economics, and making sure that
Economics.
our and if you really want to take it to that next level, we look at the fact that, like, once you begin to take advantage of the tax benefits and the things that come along with purchasing those larger buildings and all that kind of thing, our schools are run by the taxes that come from those properties. Whenever the
Mhm.
value of the homes are low, then at that point we have lower taxes, which means lower finances for our schools. But when we go in and we buy them and we raise the appreciation and we appreciate the values of those said properties, at that point we pay a little bit more taxes. Our kids got iPads in the schools.
Mhm.
Our kids got quality teachers. It's not 47 kids to one teacher and all that kind of stuff. We have a smaller classroom sizes.
Mhm.
All of it ties in. So as you're talking about the laws and you're talking about the economics, I mean, it's the trickle down effect that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily work in many other instances, but in these particular instances, it really works for us in our benefit to pay a little bit more on the taxes, to own the block, to be able to make sure that our kids have
Mhm.
what they need. And then at that point, man, it's like, and I love the thought of not just being a hero because you made a dope song. I love
Mhm.
the fact that, a kid idolizing you because it's like, yo, man, I remember whenever I was 5 years old and my parents wouldn't let me go outside and play. But now, since you came, there's a park outside and my mom's always let me go out and, swing on the jungle gyms. And I had a great childhood because of the fact that you went in and made sure that there was no longer a crack house across the street.
That's right. That's
That's
right.
a win, man.
That's
That's a
right.
win.
It's powerful. It's
Absolutely.
powerful, man. Absolutely. Absolutely, man. I want to ask you a question, Shelton, and we ask all our guests on the podcast this question. And the
Mhm.
question, simply put, is what is your mantra? Now, for me personally, my mantra is persistence wears down resistance. But, yours doesn't have to rhyme. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to rhyme, but we just want to know, like, what's a mantra that motivates you, that keeps you going, that, when things might get a little shaky, you revert back to it mentally and say, all right, you know what? I got this.
Well, mine's a little bit more lengthy, and I actually took it from a book that I love to read. It's called Think and Grow Rich, and so it's a poem. It says, "I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged and pleaded while counting my scanty store. For life is a just employer; he gives you exactly what you ask. But once you've set the wages, then you must bear the task. So I worked for a meaningless hire only to learn dismayed that any wage I would have asked of life, life would have willingly paid."
Mm,
So in my mind, I think to myself, like, is the reason why I'm not getting the results that I wish that I had is because of what I'm asking for.
hmm.
So in me going through this whole, piece with my company and stuff like that, like I'm going for, like, nobody's ever seen a construction company like this before. Like,
Hmm.
this is going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread. Like, I'm eventually going to start building high rises. Like, it's going to be soon. Like, and I just, the more I think larger, the quicker things end up coming. So you have to set your mind to a much higher task than you believe you could ever probably attain in your lifestyle, in your lifetime, I should say. And then at that point, you'll be able to reach it. So
Yeah.
I think that it's super super important, to not set your bar so low that you trip on it. You
Yeah.
got to really really set the bar high, and when you set the bar high, man, like, I mean, if you set it higher than you could ever imagine, then at that point you'll reach to something that is like, it's substantial. So
Definitely.
always set your sights to be something super high.
Awesome. Awesome. That's powerful, man. That's powerful, brother. I appreciate that, man. I'm gonna have to look that up, man. Gotta look up that book.
Yeah, man. It's a powerhouse, man.
And what's the
That
name of it
poem right
again? What's
there.
the name of the book?
The book is called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Think and Grow Rich by
Definitely check that
Napoleon
out.
Hill. Yeah, definitely.
Definitely check that out, man.
Definitely,
I read
man.
that once every summer.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. I'm sure the listeners are gonna check it out as well, man. And
Absolutely.
so we have one more question for you, man. The last final question is, can you just talk about all the exciting things that you got going on with your business that's on the horizon that people should look out for? And what's the next chapter for Shelton Quiller?
So, some things that we have going on now. I actually just, this past Wednesday, got my safety registration number. What that might not, it might not, mean a lot to some people, but that's a really, really big deal for me because what happens is that, whenever I was first licensed as a home improvement contractor, it pretty much relegated me to, like, simple, interior renovations and, light exterior painting, small carpentry, and stuff like that. But now with a safety registration number, I can actually be able to pull serious permits, in the city of New York. And so, the real key now is for us to be able to, take this safety registration, and then it'll allow us to be able to do, additions, ground up builds. It's going to allow us to be able to, now work on, commercial properties, and high rises and that sort of thing. And so it this really, also it allows me to, I have, all three endorsements for both construction, for demolition. So I can now do massive demolition projects, and I can also do concrete work. So I'm going to start bidding with the city to be able to start taking on city streets and roads, because in the 5 boroughs it's like playing Frogger, you're dodging pothole after pothole,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I would love to be able to make my community awesome. But I think that overall, the biggest thing for me right now is really going to be the fact that I'm going to go to school for being an architect. I think that that is one of my personal goals. Of course, the company is continuing to grow. Right now, currently, we have about 13 guys on staff, which is a nice little enclave of guys that range from concrete workers to master carpenters. We also have great connections with mill workers. We're doing custom cabinetry, and there's a contract that I'm gonna whisper about that actually is a really big deal that we just came across, that for some major food chains that are in the city, mainly some places that sell really good burritos and tacos that everybody loves to go to.
Okay,
I think
okay.
that you could probably guess guess that
Chipotle.
company. I think that might be it. I think
Okay,
that
all right.
possibly could
We
be it.
we we
It's
heard that we heard that whisper loud and clear, brother.
absolutely. So that's a really really big deal. So
It's awesome.
we're going to be doing all the the banquettes and the utensil counters and stuff like that. And so we'll be doing those inside the city. We're looking to do 30 by the end of the year. So
Awesome.
that's a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, the contract that we have is not just going to be for here in the city of New York. It's going to be really nationwide. So we'll be making the custom cabinetry and whatnot and sending it really around the country. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge deal that we're really excited about. And so those are kind of the things that are on the horizon right now. So
Awesome, man. Well, I love to see it. I love to see success, especially within our community. You know what I'm saying? So, to see people motivated, driven, and succeeding, that's what it's about. And, I just wish you much more success. I mean, of course, you got my number, man. We're going to continue to build regardless, brother. Yeah, we're kind of
absolutely,
forever.
yeah, we're kind of forever, baby. That's how we
Yeah,
roll.
you know it. You know it, man. So,
Absolutely, man. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having me on your show, man. And ever since we got a chance to really link together, man, the chemistry has been fantastic. I love what it is that you're doing, man. I'm also, as you know, a musician myself as well. So it means a lot to me to see guys that actually were able to I just couldn't seem to get my footing where I needed to be to really take my music to the next level. But to see you living what it is that at the time I was trying to do it, it's awe inspiring, man. So I'm really happy to see you not just having your platform for music, but also being able to inspire people around the country and through your podcast. So this is a complete honor to be here today.
oh, definitely, definitely, brother. Well, we appreciate you being here, man. Definitely,
Yes, sir.
man, and we'll continue to build, man. So, appreciate your time, man, and everybody, thanks for listening as always, man. The Diagnosis Success Podcast, man. You guys be inspired.